Hi guys, welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business, all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. And today we are chatting about stress and what it does to the body, what it means for your health journey, your weight loss journey. So to start off, stress is what? Stress is basically any shift, any deviation from the body's normal functioning, right?
Yeah. So you can think of that as mental stress, physical stress, emotional stress, any number of different things that have these effects on your body at a hormone level, and any number of other levels too. And that's going to affect every single one of those goals that you just listed. Absolutely.
So it's not just mental, emotional stress, like the things that we would commonly perceive as stress. It's anything going on inside the body that is throwing our body off track, which a lot of times inside the body is related to inflammation and inflammation status, which we can talk about a little bit later. But the main driver behind this whole stress response in the body is something called the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands.
Yep.
So those three things, which is basically the system between the brain and the rest of the body and how they communicate with each other and how they control parts of the body to deal with stress. So basically, your body sends signals to the brain, to the hypothalamus specifically, that perceives stress, or the hypothalamus picks up stress.
Right.
And so the hypothalamus is going to talk to the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is going to talk to the adrenal glands, which are those little kind of like triangle-shaped glands on top of your kidneys.
Yep.
And your adrenal glands are going to produce your main stress hormones. The one that we're going to focus on today is cortisol, because cortisol is something that very much impacts every single person on a daily basis.
Right.
So what is cortisol?
So cortisol, like you said, is your main stress hormone. It's something that is actually important for you to have.
Absolutely.
So a lot of people actually think of this as this big negative term, because it can certainly get out of hand. You can certainly have too high cortisol, but cortisol is what's responsible for waking you up in the morning, and actually just giving you energy, providing you with glucose, I believe. So a number of actual requirements that it's giving your body. So it's not something that you're trying to erase by any means.
No, your body needs cortisol. So the difference between cortisol and some of your other stress hormones is that cortisol is something that your body produces every single day in a specific pattern throughout the day. So like you said, cortisol wakes us up in the morning. So cortisol actually is supposed to, if your body's working the right way, is supposed to peak in the morning, waking you up for the day. And then cortisol is supposed to slowly fall over the course of the day, bottoming out in the evening time where melatonin is supposed to rise. So melatonin being the hormone that puts us to sleep.
Right.
So when there are any deviations in this cortisol pattern, that's where we see problems and we see, people having symptoms. The most common deviation from this normal pattern being, higher cortisol.
Right. So there's always cortisol in your body, always flowing through it, but at that level, it has a very normal curve to it, and it starts to decline over the course of the day.
Yes, it is supposed to. So the problem that I think a lot of people run into, well, that I know a lot of people run into, is that people experience a lot of stress all day, every day, especially in today's world where we're just kind of like just pounded by stress every single day. And it can be coming from a lot of different areas. But again, the body is going to perceive the stress the same way. So your cortisol patterns are going to, well, your cortisol levels, I guess I should say, are going to start to form a different pattern in light of this constant state of chronic stress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So as you go through these periods of chronic stress and you're not able to deal with stress very well, those cortisol patterns are going to change, and it's going to affect all the other systems of the body. Because cortisol is something that kind of changes the systems in the body to react with stress, or to react to stress, I guess I should say.
And that's any type of stress. So that can be physical, that can be mental, that can be... So whether it's you pushing too hard in the gym,
absolutely,
not eating enough, a combination of those two things, or just like some emotional things going on, all of that can contribute to that cortisol imbalance.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that not a lot of people think about, especially people on a weight loss journey, is people don't really consider the fact that their exercise routine and their diet can both be putting additional amounts of stress on their body on top of a lot of the stress that we tend to ignore. So like work stress, or, stress of sitting in traffic, or, stress of having to get your kids ready for bed every evening. So there are these different, stressful situations that we run into every single day, and we kind of start to ignore them. So even if we don't mentally react to the stress the same way over time, our body is still forced to react.
Yeah. And we see that all the time, where people are beating themselves up for not seeing the results that they want to. But then you look at what happened over the course of their week, and it's like, well, obviously nothing happened.
Obviously.
Like you were a wreck this whole week.
So, and that's because cortisol is, again, changing things on like a chemical level inside the body. So what are some things that cortisol does inside the body that can affect weight goals?
So it actually lowers your ability to burn fat. So obviously having a fat loss goal, if cortisol is through the roof, then that impact on lipolysis, which is fat burning, is not something that you want.
No, not at all. Well, and so what we know about cortisol is that, again, it's kind of priming your body for this emergency state. It's trying to protect you. So cortisol, all of cortisol's actions are supposed to be in your best interest, but it's in the best interest of basically prolonging your life, but not always functioning optimally in that moment. So cortisol can, over time, it's actually supposed to function as an anti-inflammatory chemical. But when we have these periods of prolonged or, elevated cortisol levels in the body, it actually turns into this more inflammatory response. So we end up kind of killing our immune system, because our immune system is primed, ready to go when cortisol is elevated. So cortisol stimulates the immune system. Cortisol also can cause water retention. Cortisol causes your body to produce more glucose. It can increase insulin resistance. It increases protein breakdown, so muscle breakdown essentially. So all of these things are basically working against you if your goal is fat loss.
Right.
So another couple of things that cortisol can do is it actually can take energy away from other really important processes in the body. So things like digestion and reproductive hormone building.
Yes.
So, when we're taking energy away from these other important things, nothing in the body is getting done optimally. Everything is getting done just barely to keep you alive, but nothing is getting done very well.
Sure.
And we know that when things aren't working the way that they're supposed to, or they're not working very well, fat loss is at the very, very bottom of the priority list for the body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we're trying to lose body fat or change body composition, changing body composition is typically totally against your body's natural instincts for survival.
Absolutely.
So whenever you're in these increased stressful situations where these hormones that are built into your system to protect against certain things or just to keep you alive, oftentimes that goal of body composition is directly opposed to these internal functions. So when you've got all these added stressors going on and these hormones get out of whack, the last thing that your body is worried about is your fitness goals.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, at the top we have breathing and staying alive, and then as we go down the list, it's kind of like, having energy and then maybe building hormones and things like that, or neurotransmitters, and then digestion, and then getting rid of body fat.
Right.
Like body fat is something that protects you.
Yeah.
So in an emergency response or in a, protective response, the body's going to try and hold on to that protective material.
Yeah. So if you're always in this elevated stress state, that is basically shutting those systems down.
Yes.
Down the length of that chain, the bottom's getting totally disregarded.
Absolutely. And what happens over time is that, there's this whole feedback loop, right? So kind of back to that idea of the HPA axis is the brain telling the adrenal glands to produce this cortisol. Well, once your body reaches a certain cortisol level, that system is supposed to shut off. But over time, the receptors in the brain that pick up that cortisol level, they become desensitized.
Right.
So when you've got so much cortisol in the body at all times, that desensitization. Is that a word? Desensitization. It impairs that whole system.
Right. They're getting flooded with it. So it's another safety mechanism.
Exactly.
If that continues to get that signal, then your body's going to eventually downregulate that so that it's not overwhelmed.
Well, and so what happens when it gets desensitized is that the brain can't pick up how much cortisol is actually in the body at a given time. So it doesn't know when to shut off. So it's going to keep pumping out cortisol longer than your body needs it to. And those cortisol levels are going to stay elevated for a longer period of time. So again, in small amounts, cortisol is supposed to be very protective. But in larger amounts, and when we have it, chronically elevated, it's going to be more inflammatory and have more negative effects. Yeah. Because it's basically just kind of like breaking down all the systems of the body very slowly in order to keep you alive.
So that's high cortisol. Now, is it bad to have too little cortisol?
It is. I mean, it's obviously in the body works best in these very narrow ranges for, every molecule, every hormone, everything. So having too low of cortisol is just as big of a problem. It's not as common though.
Okay.
Most people don't struggle with low cortisol. However, not to say that it doesn't exist. I would say with low cortisol, you have the issue of kind of being understimulated.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Where you have absolutely no energy. You have no motivation to get anything done. It's hard at that point to even do the bare minimum. So I would say that low cortisol can be a lot harder to fix because you have that, separate kind of motivation barrier to get over. So for people struggling with low cortisol, it's best to have some sort of testing done to find out when your cortisol levels are the highest, because you actually want to try and put anything productive during the highest cortisol time.
That makes sense. Low cortisol is something that isn't nearly as common as high cortisol.
Not at all.
Okay. So that's something that, while it definitely happens, it's not your typical thing that you'll run into.
No, I would say more often than not, because again, most people don't get to the point of having low cortisol. A lot of people with this adrenal insufficiency, which is what low cortisol is, think that they have something called adrenal fatigue. That's like a really common thing and like a common buzzword right now. But adrenal fatigue, it is a real condition, but technically the term is incorrect.
Right. There's real symptoms there, but your adrenals aren't fatigued.
Yeah. Like the actual to be fatigued means, like, that's not what's happening. It's not that the adrenal glands just get tired and stop making cortisol. It's that there is some sort of breakdown in that HPA axis, in that chain. So when we're talking about anything related to the adrenal glands not functioning correctly or to the HPA axis, it's typically just called HPA dysfunction or adrenal dysfunction.
Well, because adrenal fatigue is normally this lumping of symptoms when there isn't really an explanation for them.
Definitely.
Like it's this combination of being either tired or overly exhausted or all these different feelings that are totally real, but they don't have an actual necessarily medical explanation.
Well, I think adrenal fatigue is really just a term that people self-diagnose with.
Right.
Like, actual practitioners do not use that term.
Right.
And maybe they did for a little while until they realized that on a technical level, it's just incorrect. Mm-hmm. But the symptoms and everything associated with it still mean something and they still exist.
Right.
But again, it's not that the adrenal glands are tired. It's just that something is not working correctly.
Exactly. Right.
So the biggest way to address all of these things related to the HPA axis and to your adrenal glands is learning how to control your stress.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's ever heard of that before. Right?
Right? Which is why, we have such a big lifestyle component in our coaching. Mm-hmm. And most people either don't take the advice or don't understand why we give the advice or don't even think about it before going to a coach. But that's actually one of the most important parts because, again, if cortisol or if, any of those hormones are off in the body, we know that the body's not going to want to burn fat or build muscle or,
right.
whatever.
But then, obviously, one of the best ways to control stress and give your body what it needs is actually eating a well-balanced diet. Right?
Oh, absolutely. So, a well-balanced diet definitely gives your body the tools to respond to stress better, but you can't beat actually controlling how you respond to stress.
Oh, sure. But I'm just saying, one of the best things that you can do on top of obviously stress management is just eating properly.
Definitely. I would honestly say that the lifestyle part is bigger, is more important.
100%.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that it shouldn't be, it's not like these two things are opposed to one another.
No. Well, and you can also target specific nutrients that can help your body deal with stress a little bit better, mm-hmm. Which are typically the same nutrients that would boost your immune system. Like I said, basically you're trying to give your body more tools to respond to what's causing that stress so that your body doesn't have to spit out as much cortisol.
Sure.
So, those specific nutrients, if we're talking about, addressing adrenal health and addressing the immune system, those are these big three: magnesium, zinc, and vitamin C.
Got it.
So the three nutrients that really help boost your immune system are also the ones that are going to help with the immune system and the cortisol kind of, reaction together. Mm-hmm. So those are nutrients that you can target to help with dealing with stress from a nutrition standpoint. But you're right, having a balanced diet definitely puts less stress on the body, because the other thing too that we kind of touched on a little bit is digestion. Mm-hmm. So if your body can't digest certain things or your body reacts poorly to certain foods, that's going to cause your body to spit out more cortisol in response to that inflammation and that stress.
Yeah, you want to stay away from the inflammatory foods. Mm-hmm. You want to eat a very well-balanced diet, maybe throw some vegetables in there.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I would love if you would throw some vegetables in there, please.
But yeah, and so what are some other things that you can do to kind of manage these stress levels and just from a lifestyle standpoint? Well,
so since we know that chronically elevated cortisol is the issue, that's something habitual, right? Mm-hmm. That's coming from something that's continuing to stress you out.
Right.
So I would say the number one thing for a lot of my clients is to identify their biggest stressors. And obviously some of them are going to be things that you can't do anything about. For most people, they can't do anything about the fact that they have a job that stresses them out, or the fact that, they have kids with certain schedules that can be stressful for them.
Sure.
But just taking that first step to identify where the stress is coming from, and then coming up with different exercises to go through to manage stress in those moments.
So some mindfulness practices.
Yes. So some mindfulness practices, maybe some meditation, maybe some breathing exercises. But even if you don't want to get so in depth with it, I would say that the other place to start would be to just build in some time for relaxing mm-hmm. into your weekly schedule.
That's pretty important.
That's something that we all tend to overlook is we put every single other thing on our calendar, but we don't generally put anything wellness related on our calendar, much less free time. Right. We don't schedule free time slots into our day or into our week. And when I'm saying, time for relaxation, I'm talking about anything that's going to kind of calm your body down.
Sure.
So most people will say well, the gym time is my relaxation time. That's great that it makes you feel good and that it's time for you. But at the same time, that workout is probably spiking your cortisol versus letting your body relax. So when we're talking about building in these relaxation times, we are talking about things that make you feel calm.
Sure.
Whether that's reading a book, going for a walk, a very low intensity walk, calling a friend, taking a bath, whatever that happens to be.
Right.
But scheduling it into your week so your body knows when to expect, that relaxation time, because your body loves patterns and cycles and knowing what's coming next.
Absolutely.
Because your body has already figured out your stress pattern, and now we kind of need a relaxation pattern to balance it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add for cortisol?
I think you covered just about everything that I know.
Yeah. No, I think stress control is definitely one of the biggest pieces that people miss on their health journey, especially with weight loss. They think it's not important, or they overlook it, or it's like the piece that they can't seem to really fit into their schedule, but it's definitely one of the most important.
Well, especially if you've got somebody that's fairly out of shape and their goal is weight loss, and they're jumping back into this with tons and tons of exercise and super low calorie diets. They're just creating this additional stress cocktail on top of
any other stress, which we know is a lot. Like everybody is stressed out all the time. We're all busy. We're all running back and forth. And then on top of that, like you said, you add in this weight goal and you're doing it the wrong way, which we've already talked about, trying to set ourselves up well. But, this might be the last piece that you're missing. And honestly, this might be the first place to start to really put your body in a place where it's going to respond a lot better to diet and exercise.
Absolutely. So, you got to have this down first, and then, because if your plan is there, but you're stressed out the entire time, you're not going to see the results you want to see.
No, and you're just going to make yourself feel crappier and crappier.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you guys so much for listening. We will see you next week.
Yeah. If you have any questions or you want us to cover any topics in particular, feel free to reach out to me at HypertroFit.com. You can find Alexa at therootedrd.com, and we will see you next week.
Yeah.